Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World from what you may have already noticed is not our usual London studio. That's because I'm here in Washington at the Al Jazeera studios in Washington because the US election race has really hotted up in the last few days. Later in the program, I'll be talking to Hollywood superstar George Clooney, delightful guest, to magazine editor and biographer of Princess Diana, Tina Brown, and we'll be discussing US foreign policy after George Bush's Middle East visit. But first, US politics. And who better to ask about them than veteran US statesman Henry Kissinger. I called up with him earlier and I asked him why he had announced openly and publicly that his vote is going to Republican John McCain.
I've known him for 30 years, ever since he came back from being in prison for 5 years in Vietnam. And I have developed enormous respect for his character and for his integrity. And I obviously believe that he's the right person for the Republican Party to nominate.
In fact, who would you rather your man be taking on, Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama?
Obama is a fascinating phenomenon. To have somebody with no significant practical experience suddenly emerging reflects some need in the, at least on the Democratic side, in the American public. Hillary, of course, has seen the White House operate. It really is a choice between two approaches to policy that has to be made. I really haven't made up my mind who I think would be better for America to run. And so far, of course, McCain hasn't been nominated yet either.
No, a little matter that. Yeah.
In fact, I have an unparalleled record. I have never supported a winning candidate in a Republican primary. So I supported.
Oh, in the primary, I was going to. Yes,
no,
you
I
obviously supported
Nelson
Richard
Rocky.
Nixon in 1972.
Yes, but he was
That was-
already president.
Yes.
But I supported Nelson Rockefeller 3 times against Richard Nixon in the 60s.
Yeah.
And then I supported McCain in 2000 against President Bush.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Middle East, what about the thing that the president said this week, which was interesting, wasn't it, that he thought there could be a Palestinian state within a year? Is that realistic?
It will take a lot of work to get that done. And I think it's an important goal. And it's possible to move a long distance towards it. Whether it can be completed this year, I would doubt. But unless you have great aims, you don't have great achievement. But it's a strange negotiation in this sense. Most negotiations begin with the outcome in doubt. You don't know where the parties will meet, if they'll ever meet. In this case, there is a general agreement what a final settlement should look like. What is unclear is whether the parties are strong enough to make it, and whether the international environment permits the elaboration of the guarantees that are needed to make it work. But the terms seem to me to be fairly well understood.
The outstanding problem is Jerusalem.
Most people agree that a settlement will involve more or less the 67 borders plus the settlements around Jerusalem to be compensated for by the cession of some territory to compensate the Palestinians for the settlement areas. Secondly, that there should be some partition of Jerusalem, and that the Arab part, however that is defined, should then become the capital of Palestine. That seems to be the general consensus on what a settlement would look like. What is not clear is how you bring about security guarantees, end of terrorism, end of the sort of hostile propaganda that questions the existence of the Israeli or of the Jewish state. I think these are the most difficult issues. The borders and the other issues seem to me tacitly agreed.
In terms of Iraq, Henry, you were quoted 14 months ago as saying a US military victory is not possible, and then much more recently that victory over the insurgency is the only meaningful exit strategy. Does that suggest that you are more optimistic now than you were 14 months ago?
That second sentence was taken out of a analysis of the possibility of replacing American troops with Iraqi troops. And I argued when that article was written over 2 years ago that the strategy by which the American troops would confine themselves to training Iraqi troops would not work, and that the American troops would have to be directly engaged. And it's in that sense that that since I did not believe you could train an Iraqi army quickly to replace Americans, that second sentence was written. I think the military situation in Iraq has improved. I still believe that ultimately a political solution has to be found, and that it cannot be done entirely on a military basis. But as the military situation improves, I think the conditions will exist, or hopefully will exist, in which an international conference of including all the neighboring countries, including Iran and Syria, plus the permanent members of the Security Council, might define an international status of Iraq that separates some of its internal problems from the international aspects. And I would expect that over the next 2 or 3 years, that is the solution that towards which events will gravitate. Unlike what I understand to be much of European opinion, I believe that reasonable people could come to the conclusion that a military invasion of Iraq was desirable. And even with all the mistakes that were made, I hope that what will emerge out of it will at least, well, certainly will improve the situation compared to what it was a few years ago.
In fact, who do you think that the various countries that people mention, what about Iran today? I mean, you don't think that the statement, when you look at it in detail about them having given up their seeking?
Well, I think that intelligence report is that it's a very strange document. The fundamental problem with respect to Iran seems to me to be this. When I look back to my governmental experience, the issue that worried me most was what I would do, what I would say, if the President of the United States asked me as one of the participants in that process that he had exhausted all other means and only nuclear weapons were left to him. What would I say in such a case? And I would have been torn between knowledge of the catastrophic consequences of using nuclear weapons, and on the other hand, the realization that if you forego them, you may turn the world over to the most genocidal group. Luckily, I never had to face that choice, nor did any other policymaker in the United States, because we were dealing with an adversary whose calculations were essentially the same as ours. If nuclear weapons spread into hands that exalt death as a means of fighting war, that even finds fulfillment in death, or into hands that cannot provide the technical safeguards that the more advanced countries could. And if then you have to add to it, we had one deterrent balance between us and the Soviet Union. If there are 10 in the world that have to be watched at any one moment, then I think a nuclear war at some point is inevitable. So for all these reasons, I think some solution needs to be found to the Iranian nuclear problem, partly because it is Iran, but largely because of the problem of proliferation. I would, of course, the solution should be found in diplomacy, if this is at all achievable. But I think the issue of the prevention of nuclear proliferation is an issue that faces all of mankind, and it's not that it should not be treated as an American-Iranian confrontation.
And we'll have more of that interview with Dr. Kissinger in the weeks ahead. In a minute, a different view from journalist Tina Brown. That's after this incredibly short break.